Thousands of people fired by Donald Trump are getting their jobs back today because of the first round of proverbial fireworks that went off in a California federal courthouse. And I just got the transcript of what happened there. Trying all day to get it. Finally got it. I really want to share this with you. All right, so let me set the scene. Trump administration has sent a lawyer to defend them in this case in federal court in Northern California. But they are refusing to send any officials from the Trump administration to testify in this case, to explain what they have done and to be questioned about it. The basis of this case is that the Trump White House, the Office of Personnel Management and the Trump White House told federal agencies last month, essentially, to fire tens of thousands of people who work for the government, potentially hundreds of thousands of people. And then after the Trump White House, the Office of Personnel Management told the agencies to fire all those people, then all those people got fired. And it really does not seem like that was legal. It has never seemed like that was legal, that the White House would have the authority to make those kinds of mass firings. But again, they won't send anybody to testify about what exactly they did. So this is from the transcript. So the lawyer who is suing the Trump administration says this. Your Honor, quote, what we have before the court is record evidence that conclusively establishes that OPM directed the terminations at issue. We have a very unusual circumstance where the government has not attempted to say that they factually dispute that. They've actually withdrawn the declaration by which they were attempting to dispute that. And there's no record evidence on the other side by which they have disputed this fact. The judge. I tend to agree with you on that. And the government, I believe, has tried to frustrate the judge's ability to get at the truth of what happened here, and then set forth sham declarations to a sham declaration. They withdrew it, then substituted another. That's not the way it works in the U.S. District Court, the judge says. Quote, I'm going to talk to the government about that in a minute. I had expected to have an evidentiary hearing today in which these people would testify. And if they wanted to get your people on the stand, I was going to make that happen too. It would be fair. But instead, we have been frustrated in that. The judge then says to the lawyer for the plaintiffs, quote, I'd like to hear your views on what relief should be issued today. T-O-D-A-Y, today. The lawyer, thank you, Your Honor. We are aligned in wanting that to happen as well. He spelled out T-O-D-A-Y. And so then they have a conversation, the judge and the lawyer for the plaintiffs, the lawyer who's suing the Trump administration on behalf of the fired employees. And they talk about what the fired employees who are suing the Trump administration, what they're seeking from the judge today, the kind of relief they want. They say they want a list of everybody who's been fired. They haven't been able to get that, or even an enumeration from the government of how many people have been fired. They also want people to be reinstated if they have been fired illegally. So they go through all those details. Then it's time for the Trump administration lawyer to make his side of the case. And he starts explaining to the judge that all these fired workers, the only reason they were fired is because nobody wanted them. Nobody told anybody to fire anything. There was no instructions to fire people. These are just unwanted workers. If anybody wanted them back, they surely would have been rehired by now, right? At which point the judge interjects. The judge, quote, well, maybe that's why we need an injunction that tells them to rehire them. You will not bring the people in here to be cross-examined. You are afraid to do so because you know cross-examination would reveal the truth. Trump administration lawyer tries to interject. Respectfully, the judge continues. This is the U.S. District Court. Whenever you submit declarations, those people should be submitted to cross-examination, just like the plaintiff side should be. And we get at the truth of whether your story is actually true. I tend to doubt it. I tend to doubt that you are telling me the truth whenever we hear all the evidence eventually. Why can't you bring your people in to be cross-examined or to be deposed at their convenience? I said 2 hours for Mr. Ezell. Mr. Ezell is the acting head of OPM. I said 2 hours for Mr. Ezell, a deposition at his convenience. And you withdrew his declaration rather than do that? Come on, that's a sham. The judge says, quote, go ahead. It upsets me. I want you to know that. I have been practicing or serving in this court for over 50 years, and I know how we get at the truth. And you're not helping me get at the truth. You're giving me press releases, sham documents. All right, he says, quote, I'm getting mad at you, and I shouldn't. The judge then decided in this hearing today that he wasn't going to wait to give a written ruling. He decided, you know what, I've heard enough. He decided he was going to rule from the bench today. T-O-D-A-Y, today. So he started with this, the judge, quote, on February 13th, 2025, a briefing paper from Human Resources Management at the Forest Service says this, quote, all, that's spelled A-L-L, all federal agencies, including the Department of Agriculture, were notified on February 12th by the Office of Personnel Management to terminate all employees who have not completed their probationary or trial period. That then led to the termination of a lot of people, the judge says. But one in particular I will give as an example. Leandra Bailey was a physical science information specialist in Albuquerque. In September of last year, she'd received a performance review in which she was, quote, fully successful in every category, not just some, but every category. On February 13th, she was terminated using the OPM template letter. Because in addition to directing these terminations, OPM gave a proposed letter, and the letter said, I'm reading from it, Memorandum for Leandra Bailey, February 13th, from the Director of Human Resource Management at the U.S. Forest Service. This is just one sentence. Quote, the agency finds, based on your performance, that you have not demonstrated that your further employment at the agency would be in the public interest, close quote. And then the judge says, this, despite the fact that her most recent review was fully successful in every category. The judge says, now, how could it be, you might ask, that the agency could find that based on her performance when her performance had been stellar? The reason OPM wanted to put this based on performance was, at least in part, in my judgment, a gimmick. Because the law always allows you to fire somebody for performance. And the judge says this. Now, what I'm about to say is not the legal basis for what I'm going to order today, but I just want to say it. He says, quote, it is a sad day when our government would fire some good employee and say it was based on performance when they know good and well that's a lie. Excellent in all, fully, what was the phrase? I don't want to misstate it. Quote, fully successful in every category, yet they terminate her based on her performance. That should not have been done in our country. It was a sham in order to avoid statutory requirements. It also happens to be that whenever you fire somebody based on performance, then they can't get unemployment insurance. So that makes it even worse, doesn't it? And then it makes it even worse because the next employer is going to say, well, have you ever been terminated based on performance? They're going to have to say yes to thousands of people. It is illustrative of the manipulation that was going on by OPM to try to orchestrate this government-wide termination of probationary employees. Quote, the court finds that OPM did direct all the agencies to terminate probationary employees. The court rejects the government's attempt to use these press releases and to read between the lines to say that the agency heads made their own decision with no direction from OPM. The relief that's going to be granted is as follows. First, the temporary restraining order will be extended. The VA shall immediately offer reinstatement to any and all probationary employees terminated on or about February 13th or 14th. This order finds that all such terminations were directed by defendant OPM and were unlawful because OPM had no authority to do so. Further, the VA shall cease any and all use of the template termination notice provided by OPM and shall immediately advise all probationary employees terminated February 13th and 14th that the notice and termination have been found to be unlawful by the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. The VA shall cease any termination of probationary employees at the direction of OPM. To repeat, this order holds that OPM has no authority whatsoever to direct, order, or require in any way that any agency fire any employee. Now, given the arguments and the facts in this case, namely that defendants have attempted to recast these directives as mere guidance, my order today, quote, further prohibits defendants from giving guidance as to whether any employee should be terminated. Any termination of agencies' employees must be made by the agencies themselves, if made at all, and they must be made in conformity with the Civil Service Reform Act and the Reduction in Force Act and any other constitutional or statutory legal requirement. He says, quote, in 7 calendar days, relief defendant, VA, the VA shall submit a list of all probationary employees terminated on or about February 13th and 14th, with an explanation as to each of what has been done to comply with this order. Then the judge says this. Now, this order so far has only mentioned the VA, the Veterans Administration. But the same relief is extended, and I'm not going to repeat it, but I'm extending the same relief to the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, the Department of the Interior, the Department of Treasury. And so it's the VA plus all those other agencies. He says, and this is without prejudice to extending the relief later in further to other agencies. The judge then closes with this. I will try to get out a short memorandum opinion that elaborates on this order, but this is the order, and it counts effective immediately. Please don't say, oh, I'm waiting for the written order. This is the order from the bench. And then the judge then closes with this admonition to the Trump administration lawyer. Quote, if you want to appeal to the Court of Appeals, God bless you. I want you to, because I'm tired of seeing you stonewall on trying to get at the truth. And that is how thousands of people who work in our government, who Donald Trump and his top campaign donor tried to fire, that is how thousands of Americans got their jobs back today. At the VA, at USDA, at the Defense Department, at the Department of Energy, at the Department of Interior, which includes the National Park Service, at the Treasury Department, which of course includes the IRS. The court ruling also means that the Office of Personnel Management, which they've been using as like the central office for all this stuff that DOJ has been doing, right? The Office of Personnel Management at the White House can no longer tell anyone anything about anybody who should be fired for any reason from any part of the U.S. government. This is the order.